Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in for this lunchtime session in conversation with David Lammy MP. I'm sure he needs absolutely no introduction whatsoever. David is very well known to those of us in the music sector. He is a huge supporter, has a brilliant music background himself, but also has got lots and lots of other areas of interest outside of music, and I hope we're going to be touching on some of the extraordinary work he has been doing, possibly touch on things like criminal justice, which I know is an issue close to his heart, but also looking at Brexit, which is something challenging most of us, and also Black Lives Matter, and where we need to go as a sector to actually take on board the issues that Black Lives Matter have raised. So an awful lot to cover. David needs to leave promptly at 10 to 2. So do get those questions ready so that I can ask David as we go through. But firstly, David, just let's start with your own musical background. Just tell us a bit about it.
Well, I think the important thing to recall for those who are on is I'm about a similar age to Aled Jones.
Oh, right.
And way back in the early 80s, he got to #1 in the charts with Walking in the Air. And a few folk in Tottenham, it was a time when people were talking a lot about boy choristers, Vienna Boys Choir, that sort of thing. Said, look, you know, David's got a good voice. And basically between the local priest, primary school head teacher, and a wonderful, wonderful music teacher in Tottenham with a huge dedication to lifting the chances of kids in the inner city through music, Mrs. Shepherd, they conspired to send me for voice trials, and I went and had a trial at Southwellminster and Peterborough Cathedral, and chose Peterborough because it was nearer to London. I'd never been on an intercity train, and I was a bit worried about boarding away from home. And so that set me off at a wonderful school in the choral tradition, practicing every day. And I always say to people now doing this job that business of being prompt, being prepared, trying to do my very best really starts from practice and the frequency of music at that time in my life and the excellence I learned. You know, it's an awe-inspiring and scary thing doing you know, the solos in Mozart in D minor or something in a big cathedral, and the fact that I pulled it off has stayed with me ever since.
So you weren't just a member of the choir, you were also a soloist.
I was a soloist. I had violin tuition at school. I wasn't a great violinist, but I did have a very patient teacher. And I'm still in the parliamentary choir. There's a fantastic parliamentary choir. I'm not able, I like to practice, and I'm a bit of a busy MP, so I tend to be in the Christmas concert because I know all the you know, all the tunes basically, and I'm a tenor these days.
I was going to ask you, what part do you sing? So you're a tenor, so those are actually quite sought after, aren't they? So
they are a bit, yeah. They're always just come back into the choir. Forget the riots in Tottenham, David. We need you, whatever it is.
Yeah. So is there a piece of choral music that you're particularly fond of?
Oh God, there's loads. I mean, I was glad, Parry's I was glad I love. Oh, for the wings of a dove. I mean, there's too many. I mean, too many. I was sort of thinking, if I'm ever asked on Desert Island Disc, you know, a lot of it will be choral, which I think will surprise a lot of people.
But you can't beat it, can you? I mean, are you actually going to be singing this year, the parliamentary choir? Are you not?
Well, I don't. Well, look, we're all caught in the same way that everybody is. I think we're all deeply depressed that music has been caught up in the crosshairs of this pandemic in the way that it has. will obviously come on to the industry, but of course the ability to perform in fellowship with others in a gathered way in choirs has been prohibited really for the vast majority of this time. And okay, we've got the news of the vaccine, thank God. You know, there'll be differences of views how much we can trust the government to get the vaccine out successfully and in a prompt way. And until that happens, frankly, we're not going to see music come back in the way that we all want it to.
I think one of the things from the 2 sessions so far today has been, and we've heard from performers and then we heard from music venue managers who are on their knees basically, and these are the smaller music venues keeping places like Hastings or Inverness together, really. These are not the Royal Albert Halls, but they're all saying that they don't really understand what the government is doing when they say they're following the science. So they say, you know, planes are fine, but going to a music venue isn't. And there's a lot of real kind of what's going on here. And one of the contributors said, we just feel as if we've been villainized, really. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that I think it's been depressing to see these live centres particularly mothballed effectively over this period. I think the sector has not been trusted, obviously, to socially distance, to also work with scientists to convey what is required. Everyone understands that, but has been sort of shut down. You know, I see it from lots of ends as a constituency MP. For example, the football community has lobbied really intensely to reopen football. Again, large gatherings, it's nothing like what they would like. Of course, it's nothing like the numbers, but we had grassroots football clubs effectively about to go bust. That's not that dissimilar in the music sector, is it really?
No.
So there must be a way of opening that is within the rules. We know that other countries have facilitated and allowed it. What I think the government have got wrong is really a sector specific approach. One on the economic support that's necessary, and that's critical in the music sector. And it's been way out of step, frankly, with other bits of the economy, and understanding the ability of sectors easily to come back after this. And I suspect if this goes on right through 2021, music's going to be in a lot of trouble, and it will be very hard to come back. And it's a huge, massive dent on our country. We're global leaders in this area. It's a huge part of our GDP and global output. So we need the sector to come back when this is all over.
I think it was really hard from the sector's perspective when we were told you can't work, you absolutely can't work, you know, your venues are shut, and then to be told and you're not viable, and you're kind of thinking, hang on a moment, the only reason we can't work is you've told us we can't work. So there's a real circularity going on in the government's thinking that makes no sense if you're working in the music sector. Look,
you've got to, when you're in government, and I say this having been in government, I say this having been culture minister, you know, you do need to be robust sometimes with Treasury officials and others who don't completely get the story. My Secretary of State at the time when I was culture minister was Tessa Jow, and Tessa Jow was quite able to have robust conversations with Gordon Brown if required, or indeed with Number 10. She was an effective Secretary of State. Now, this was an era where we were investing quite a lot in music and music education, but we all understand that we've then had austerity. But the point is, this is a major contributor to our GDP. We cannot talk about a creative economy without this sector central to it. We will get through this pandemic. We need it to recover. What is the support that's necessary to get it to that part? And how can we have been in a situation where the freelancers and the excluded, and it's so tragic to describe them as excluded, who clearly have been the mainstay of the sector and our economy, are so shut out of the financial support that they're necessary. Of course, they're not. The use of the word viability was incredibly poor, should have been retracted straight away. And frankly, we should not have had to have seen the campaigning that we've seen from those who've been excluded from the proper support. It still goes on because actually hospitality, I know that clearly music is not hospitality, but it works with hospitality, have been really fairly poorly treated and are losing out financially to this day.
Absolutely. I think we still have huge problems in relation to the self-employed scheme, and the latest iteration actually is far less supportive than the previous scheme.
That's right.
And I think what we're seeing is lots of musicians saying, well, actually, shall I just give up? Shall I go and work for Amazon instead?
Yeah, I've got friends who are musicians. I've got lots of constituents actually who, because of the nature of housing stock in London, are in constituencies like mine, because they can just about afford to be in London in a constituency like mine. So I've got lots of representations, and it's very, very sad to see people saying, I've got to leave the sector, I've got to pay the bills. And so I'll take whatever's coming, basically. And very little security, I guess, about when things will come back. And I recognise also the things that you relied on before. You could do a little bit of tuition in schools. You could box, and you might do some extra work in a cafe. The way you could juggle, all of it has been shut down, and so you've not been able to juggle in that way.
So you mentioned music education. It's not been brilliant in terms of music education
for a long time. It's a long running story. I mean, GCSE music is down dramatically. A-level music is down dramatically. Never mind, mature conversations, which tend to be what you want to be in government. It's about pedagogy and how we teach music, and
absolutely
the latest practice and the best practice from across the world and deploying. I'm afraid we're not in having that conversation. It's a conversation about why some subjects are being preferenced over others, largely STEM subjects, and by the way, not understanding that the iPhone I've got, all of those technologies coming together. The reason why we've got great universities is precisely because they're interdisciplinary. We don't just rely on one department, or we'd get nowhere. So this has fallen on deaf ears, and clearly. And it's so, I mean, I've got to the stage now in politics where the ping pong, the cycle is depressing, because, I want to see our government back in power. When we do see our government back in power, people like me, I'm married to an artist, by the way, who care a lot about creativity in the arts, will be lobbying very aggressively. But the strategy we're going to need to get back to where we were, this is going to be a 20-year plan. And it's just really, really depressing and entirely unnecessary. And by the way, we can't afford this. We're now going into a recession. Never mind leaving the European Union. I mean, we can't afford for the music sector and this hugely important part of the economy to be on its back heels in the way that I suspect it might well be.
I think from my perspective, you do end up feeling a little bit paranoid, because firstly we had the Ebac, which has had this huge impact, as you say, on GCSEs and A levels, and then we saw DfE saying just a month or so ago, well, core subjects, those are the things that schools need to focus on. So again, music isn't so important. Then we've got COVID and the music sector and the arts not being supported. And then we've got Brexit, no trade deal. And musicians traditionally have earned quite a lot of their money through touring in Europe. And of course, the end of freedom of movement. So if you were kind of looking at UK PLC in terms of profit and loss, it's a very strange way to be treating a very profitable part of the economy. And that's the bit I don't really get, because it's worth close on 6 billion. And I just don't understand why it's not better treated.
My views on exiting the European Union are well broadcasted and well known. And some of the way I reacted and why I fought very hard to try and get the British public a second vote on the deal, lost that, unfortunately, for lots of reasons, was precisely because I worried that those who were the proponents of this had an idea of Britain, but it was largely based on Britain in the 1950s. And so we see, for example, a debate around fisheries and fish. I don't want to argue that this isn't a significant part of our economy, but I on the numbers I've seen, it's clearly not as important as the creative economy. And if you took a slice within the creative economy and took music, it clearly isn't as important as music financially. So what is the future economy, and how do we make sure that we've got that future economy? You know, very sadly, as people lose their jobs because of technology, you've got to be really focused on that future economy, skilling people up. Music's one of those sectors that transcends, you know, you've got both the classic and the technologies taking music forward in exciting new ways. And I worry that those who are the masters of our country don't particularly or fully want to get this or understand this. I, at the moment, have got responsibility for justice within on the front bench of the Labour Party. I've got the same calls, by the way, from lawyers. They don't know if they're going to have freedom of movement in Europe to go and fight cases. It happens that our common law system here in the UK is the most preeminent in the world, and people want to come here. Are they going to be able to get here? None of this clarity has been produced. So all I would say to friends who are musicians and colleagues linked in this afternoon is, this is not the only part of the sector hugely worried. I've seen the debate about, I think it's clause 25, whether this actually works for musicians properly. Very little clarity on whether it does. My instinct tells me that when we exit the European Union at the end of December, there is going to be at least 6 months of great uncertainty, huge problems, lots of bureaucracy. And a lot of people will say, I told you so. But I take no credit in saying that. There's no joy in saying that, because this is people's livelihoods on the line.
I think from the IMSF perspective, our concern is that we were told this would lead to less bureaucracy, but actually the level of bureaucracy coming down the line, if you want to tour in Europe, is going to be absolutely massive. And again, I think there's a real risk that only the better off musicians are actually going to be able to go across to Europe. So there's also something there about access and diversity and equality playing out.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, you know, the Royal Philharmonic getting across. It's also got to be about our young musicians being able to have exchange. So look, it will sort itself out, because the truth is, across particularly the European Union, there will be a desire from our colleagues to fix these problems. But I suppose it's not my job to water down the problems that I think might ensue in the short term particularly. And I think there will be some short-term issues. I really do. And it will damage livelihoods at a time when we can't afford it because of the pandemic, particularly, and how that's affected the economy, and particularly how it's affected the music sector, which won't be recovering in 2021, even with a vaccine. The recovery will be long into 2022. And that's because, of course, you know, it's not just about the music venues. It's also about how it's affected the rest of the economy, how comfortable people feel about spending on leisure, particularly well-being. All of those things will have a knock-on effect. And so, you know, it's a tough period. After a period where I know, because of your figures and others, there'd been a major output, in fact, in music's contribution to our GDP.
So just shifting a little bit to Black Lives Matter, which has really been highly visible within the music community with various initiatives. Just two aspects of that. Where would you like to see the Black Lives Matter campaign going next? And what do you think the music sector should be doing?
Well, look, I mean, I have to say I was initially a little cynical in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd back in May. And that was because it didn't feel to me this was being presented as if it was new, and it wasn't new. You know, very sadly, Black men, Eric Garner, Ray Trayvon Martin, that story is a very old story. And indeed, the truth is that whilst we don't have the guns here in the UK, David Cameron would not have asked me to do a review on the criminal justice system if there wasn't a significant issue to deal with. And very, very sadly, 53% of our young offenders come from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background here in the UK. It's very, very worrying. However, and there is a however, I am hugely heartened by the calls I've had, the emails I've had, the requests I've had. I'm really encouraged by the millennials and young people who get this stuff, just like they get climate change. Enough is enough for them on issues of systemic and structural racism. They do want to know our history, actually. And, you know, Britain's been very good at talking about Henry VIII and the two H's, I call it, Henry VIII beating Hitler, and very little in between. And I'm afraid the in between, both the good, the bad, and the ugly, is quite important. And some of these shame and guilt stories can actually be, you know, stories that you build on, because it explains the reason why we're multicultural today, and the reason why we, you know, take fighting for human rights so seriously. And I think that younger people are up for that. They haven't got the levers of power yet. They're not running. They're not running political parties, FTSE 100 companies, orchestras, or anything really. But they will get there, and that gives me some hope. In relation to music, look, I do want to see young people from poorer backgrounds, young people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, able to get music tuition. I want it in a way that works for them. I'm really worried about the defunding of local authorities and the massive cuts to music education, patchy as it is now across the country. When I was in the job, I loved, and that's why we got pilots, the El Sistema system in Venezuela, the group practice, which I've always believed is much better fit than expecting the inner city child growing up on the 24th floor of the tower block estate to practice at home. Bring them together in a group practice forum. I think there's more to do there. We have seen the birth of orchestras now that look like the country. Not enough, but that's an exciting development. I remember there was just the Sphinx Orchestra out of Detroit that was doing it. So we have seen that development now here in the UK. And, you know, trying to celebrate people's heritage and culture, to get that synthesis of different music traditions, is really important to lift spirits, lift hope, lift opportunity, and to have the role models. You do need the role models, and those role models are also now more visible, I think, in classical traditions than they have been in the past. So I think there's stuff to build on, but there's more to do.
And I think that actually links back to the Ebac policy, because it is shrinking music in schools, which means that access is being denied. So if access is denied to children who don't have parents that can afford for private tuition, that is going to make it more difficult for children to follow their musical talent wherever that may take us. So I would hope that the Labour Party does try and tackle the Ebac, even though it's been out there as a policy position of the government for a long time now.
Yes, well, I remember the debates we've had in Parliament about the Ebac and how critical I and other Labour colleagues were about it and remain concerned about it. So, but we're not going to be reaching government anytime soon. It's 2024 before the next general election. Let's be honest about it. I think there are issues about funding for tuition and the need for subsidy that's got to come from the public purse if we want to make, if we believe in a universal entitlement in relation to music, and I certainly do. There's another thing that I've always insisted. Look, I'm not speaking to you as a musician. I'm speaking to you as someone for whom music has been at the centre of my life, and I'm married today to a visual artist. But what I always say is, look, if you listen to a David Lammy speech in the House of Commons and you think it's half good, please understand that I learned that literacy, if you like. I learned that ability to have the confidence to stand up and speak, not through the spoken word, but through music. It was being a chorister and striving for excellence and practicing in music that produces a David Lammy. And I see, look, I see this, the other end of the spectrum. I see this in prisons, the fantastic work that music therapy plays in our prisons, and the arts play, working with people with troubled backgrounds. Music is often a way in when other areas of the curriculum aren't working. So there's an important way to understand music holistically across the spectrum, really. And I just think that understanding has been lost. And whilst, of course, you would expect me as a politician to stress the financial contribution of music, the GDP, and all the rest of it, I'm not backing off music for music's sake, well-being, and not being so utilitarian that we're sort of, unless music can demonstrate outcome financially, somehow it's not of worth. I'm afraid if that were the case, just the names, the successive names from the Beatles to Benjamin, so many names would not be making this country as global as it is. So there's a perversity in this sort of new Britain engaging in the world if we're sort of cutting the legs from under the generation that will go forward and do that in the years to come.
I totally agree with all of that. I mean, we have been using both intrinsic and extrinsic arguments to government, and neither of them work. So even when we use the extrinsic one, you know,
because you're confronted with Philistines, but I can say that because I'm in the opposition.
So we have tried every single kind of message out there, and nothing gets through. And instead, we get Fatima thinking about cybersecurity as her next career move. Can I just finish?
I just want to say there's a small point here. We've clearly gone through a period where I think there have been a number of politicians who've become special advisors. They've done PP at Oxford or somewhere. It's not clear that they ever had a particular passion for the arts in any area at all. And we have generated, it's not just actually in the current government, I've seen them in my own party. So there's also, I think, something to say also about making sure that people who are passionate about the arts, this is broader than music, do stand for office, do get involved, are political. You can't be absent from these political battles because there aren't enough of us who appreciate this stuff, to be honest.
It's interesting because in the last session, I asked all the venue managers, had they written to their MP, and they're all in extremis, you know, all their venues are about to topple over, and only one of them had. Yeah, so there's a real disconnect there between the arts and politics.
MPs do respond particularly to volume. If you're getting a lot of emails on one subject, if you're in a marginal seat, colleagues, By the way, you can look at the lists and work out the seats that are marginal, group together and make it clear to those members of parliament. And there are a lot of marginal seats in the red wall at the moment. You know, make it clear Labour's got to win some seats in the southeast. There are quite a lot of marginal seats. You know, concentrate your efforts on those MPs and let them know your ability to shift that vote in a few hundred votes, and they've lost their seat. It does command their attention.
And we saw that, of course, in Georgia, Atlanta, with the Donald Trump recent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things that the ISM is always asking its members and supporters is to write to their MP. So really, you're asking us to do that, to make sure people are writing.
It does matter. It is noticed. It's more noticed when it's not just one letter. So the lobbying power. I mean, an example of this is I did think that the excluded campaign was an effective campaign. Look, I know it's not delivered the results from the current government, but the issues have been raised by MPs time and time again, because we saw the emails coming in, we looked at the detail, and we thought, my God, they've left these guys out. And so it is effective.
Very last question: have you got any parliamentary colleagues from whichever party who is as passionate and as brilliant an advocate as you when it comes to music?
Well, look, I think my starting point would be look up the members of parliament who are members of the parliamentary choir. It's cross-party, and there are absolutely Conservative colleagues as well, people like Bernard Jenkin and others who are, you know, passionate about music. I got a nudge the other day from Ed Balls. What's nothing to do with criminal justice, everything to do with some music policy and something that he wanted done. He's not obviously in the Parliamentary Labour Party. He sent me a text and said, do you know about this? We've got to fix this problem, or something like that. I won't say exactly what it is. So we do exist, and obviously there was some fantastic debates German debates in the last Parliament on Ebac, and that flushed out the MPs that care about this stuff. I would encourage you to generate a few more debates on those subjects. I can't participate in the way I could before because I'm no longer a backbencher. So if you don't front benches there, doesn't mean they're not interested. It's because they've got to stick to. I've got to stick to justice. But it does flush out new friends, and both political parties now have big new intakes of MPs. I don't know these guys, so we got to get some friendly faces to put down debate. So we flush out who are the friends and who cares about these things. It's been a little bit harder, of course, because of coronavirus. It has affected our parliamentary debates. They're not of the quality and the standard that they were previously. People are doing it virtually, which is not the same, clearly, as being in the room, in the same way that music's not quite the same if you're doing it virtually. But I would encourage you to do that over this next while, because there's been such a churn in members of parliament in the last couple of general elections.
Well, good to hear that, because we have a Westminster Hall debate on music education.
Oh, do you?
Tuesday.
I didn't know. Okay, what time is it on Tuesday? I might look in. Even though
we will send you some stuff, even though you're not allowed to participate. But it's to launch our new report on music education, which is interesting, actually. I just want to thank you, David. You have been fantastic. You have been wonderful. And if only you were looking after us at this moment in time, I think we'd all sleep easier in our beds. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight talking to you.
Thank you. I really enjoy it. Thanks so much. Keep going. I know how tough it is, and I wish I could say that it was, you know, there were sunny uplands within sight. The vaccine's good news, but clearly we've all got to brace ourselves for a tough 2021. We will get out of it. Keep lobbying, keep pushing, keep raising the issues. We will get there.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye.